the rhythm, catching every beat. Together we embrace the futures at our feet. The futures at our feet.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. It is a pleasure to be with you for another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We are joined in the studio by another person from across the pond. Last episode was with Megan Alfano, all the way from Edmonton in Canada. Not quite, I would say that our guest today is closer than Megan is to, well, he's closer to Megan than it is to us, but he's still a long way from Edmonton in Canada. And so we're looking forward to that. But before we introduce our guest, Steve, it's good to see you, my friend. How are you? Good week?
All good, absolutely fine. The weather is pretty good in the UK. Has been for about 24 hours, so probably going to be a change and hammering it down.
It's all
pretty
going to
soon,
change.
Yeah, absolutely. Just everything that's predictable is the unpredictability of the weather, and very British. We talk about the weather, but yeah, all good. How about you, Ben?
Yeah, really good, really good. It's been a busy few weeks. It's nice to be at home a little bit, still working hard, but not having to travel into different time zones and screw my mind up. But yeah, we're back here. It's Father's Day in the UK this weekend, so that'll be nice. I'll probably have to make my own breakfast again. But it is fantastic to be having another episode of the podcast, and waiting patiently. I say in the background, they're not. They're right there in the studio waiting and like, this is a bit awkward. Are you two just having a chat without us? But it's like being at the pub and not being invited in a conversation. But we are really pleased to be joined by a new friend of the podcast, not met before. So it's great to meet you, Matt. Tell us a little bit about you and the kind of the journey that you've been on.
Well, thanks for having me, Ben and Steve. You guys are doing great work, and I love the message around just helping kids and families navigate their education plan. So what you guys are doing and leading on is right up my alley and what I've been passionately doing for 30 years. So thanks for having me. I'm dialing in from Salt Lake City, Utah, so in the USA. So we're excited to be able to join you guys across the pond in the UK, and love being with you. So quick background on myself. I started my career, well, actually I started my first education company when I was 17. And I just fell in love with teaching and learning and education. My mom was a high school teacher, so I had that in my blood already. And so I became a teacher. I taught sixth grade, so like the 11, 12-year-olds, and just loved it. Just that time of life for those kids is so interesting. I then got my master's degree, actually focused on the 10 to 14-year-old child. We often call them the forgotten child or student, because they're too old for the younger grades. They're too young for the older schools, and they're right in the middle, but they're super fun to work with. And during that time as a teacher, so I was teaching sixth grade, I got a grant to bring this new thing called the internet into my classroom. This was in 1996. So I've been doing online learning and education, in a variety of personalized ways since 96. So it's been kind of fun journey to be on, and it's exciting to be with you today.
And was the internet and online learning in 1996, was that basically loads of parents just having to not be on the phone as their learners and their young people were allowed to access dial-up because you couldn't be on the same time?
Yeah, no, we had as high speed as internet as you can get back then through it was a Microsoft funded grant up in Washington State. And we were able to teach kids to do self-directed projects, kind of the early days of PowerPoint, where they could animate different things. And I saw the engagement just go off the chart because someone other than their buddy or their mom was looking at their work, because we would post it up to a website. We would teach them HTML basics to create, their own websites. And we had a sister school in Germany. And so just to have kids be able to collaborate and see that someone else cares about what they do, they would spend way more hours on that project than if the teacher was just going to grade it.
Yeah, and interestingly, that whole experience there will probably shape a lot of where you've come into current spaces. Maybe tell us a little bit about how that influence of that early 17-year-old
Yeah.
space, masters going into internet and all that conversation. Tell us how that's evolved into where we are now.
Yeah, so that evolved to, well, first, my wife and I, we have 5 children. And so during this time, we were raising 5 children. We were raising them all in the same house, the same cadence, the same expectations and rules and Saturday job charts and, family nights. And all 5 were very different from each other. And we started realizing, okay, there might be other families who notice that their children are different from each other. You guys have children and can see that they're different. So we thought, well, their education probably should be different too, tailored to their individual needs. So that was the beginning of where we are today. Our company is Open Ed. It's an open education platform to help families adopt an open education mindset so they can tailor education to each child's different needs. So we started that in 2009 was our first year. Really, again, starting from where our children needed something different. We thought other families did too. So we created a program that allowed families to access resources, teachers, customized curriculum, technology, and really help them tap into all the resources that are available in the community, not just online. We're book-based, we're in person in the community, we're all the things you can imagine for education designed for a kid. And that's where we are today. Now, 16 years later, the program's just grown all over, and now we're launching a private school version of that online for people around the world to access. The most affordable and customizable private school online you've ever seen. It's super exciting.
Yeah, I suppose maybe the interesting bit is the appetite, and maybe we talked about this on the last episode, the appetite for what you're offering. Have you seen a sea change and a shift in terms of the appetite for that, based on the fact that potentially the models in 16 years that you're offering more appetite, because of in the last 16 years there's been no movement and iteration and development in actually what everybody else is offering? And I don't want to discredit the public school sector and everything else, but education really hasn't changed, has it, in 16 years? So actually offering something different, are you seeing that now and a growth for your growth?
We are. And in fact, next year we'll celebrate the 20-year anniversary of Sir Ken Robinson's famous YouTube piece on TED Talk around do schools kill creativity? Right. So what's funny is you go through some of the comments now on the TED Talk recording, and they're like 20 years later, we still don't get it. Right. And so that's kind of what we've seen is that families are getting it. They're not waiting for a top-down policy change. They're just changing. They're adapting and adopting open education. And over the years, one of the, as you can imagine, during COVID, our program just spiked off the charts, right? So we had this huge influx of people who were, for the first time ever, doing remote learning or personalized education. And they all said they're just going to come for a year or two, and once things go back to normal, they'll drop out of our program. Well, they got a little bit of a taste of it after a year or two, and they never went back, because the enjoyment and joy you see of children learning when they're given freedom to explore what they're interested in and finding resources to help them grow, that trajectory after COVID has just continued to grow. And what's interesting, and we can have a whole different discussion on this another time, AI is now another huge driver of this pursuit of open education, because it's now making every adult question, what will my child's future be like? I no longer can just trust a K-12 experience, a university experience, job, career, retire. That path is gone. People aren't even projecting out 2 years from now what AI will impact. So you can't even plan out 2 years from now. So that's making parents say, what skills and capabilities do I want my young children to gain and have? And are they getting that in a traditional schoolroom? And the answer is no. So they're starting to think about, what do I need to tap in to augment all of that?
So with that in mind, then, like you were saying that we can't plan 2 years ahead, and we used to be able to, didn't we? We kind of, like you said, used to know that you would go, you do your GCSEs in the UK, you do your GCSEs, you do your A levels, you go to university, you do a 3-year qualification, you go and get a job. Then you might do a master's and you might do another, but then you do that job and then you might go into middle management and then you might go into senior management and then you retire, then you die. That's what happens. And then you might get another job somewhere else and you might pivot a little bit. But most people had a trajectory. That's what they did. And we're saying now we can't even predict what the next 2 years is going to look like. And yet we do perpetuate in the vast majority of education systems a linear path that goes towards an outcome that is measured with a set of grades that then means that you are ready to go out into the big wide world, and then you get out into the big wide world and realize that you weren't prepared for it because the system is just preparing you for it's perfectly designed. Siddhartha Mitra said it's not that the system's broken. He said that the system is tuned perfectly to produce what it needs to produce, but we just don't need that system anymore. What it's producing, we don't need it anymore. And
That's
so,
really well said, Ben. Yeah, I totally agree.
And I think I'm looking at where what you're trying to do with Open Ed. Like, what is it that you're trying? How does that look different then than that traditional factory farming model that gets somebody to an outcome?
Yeah, it's many things, but it's basically, in a nutshell, it is parents be intentional about your child's education plan. Don't just default to that historical pathway and think that that's safer today than doing something different. It might be the opposite. That might be the riskier way to go, is to just have your child on the conveyor belt and trust that that's going to work out. We're seeing more and more families and more young people realize that's actually not getting me to where I want to go. And it's risky to stay on that path. I need to do something different. I need to take charge of my education. I need to think differently about it and tap into everything that I can find, not just a singular box of education. We like to say, just open it up to, a little bit of homeschooling, a little bit of public schooling, a little bit of online schooling, a little bit of apprenticeship, internship, mentoring. Entrepreneurship is a huge focus of our message. Is kids can learn more by trying to start a business than any other way of learning. And so even, starting a podcast business or starting anything like that can just help them learn so many skills that they'll never learn otherwise.
Yeah, and on that, I think what's really interesting, I'd be interested to hear how the persuasive nature has maybe had to come into play to explain for many parents and stakeholders and people who have children that potentially might be an opportunity, and I don't want to call it a sale, but ultimately where people would purchase or be engaged with your platform and your style of learning, how for the general society and those people, when they see the route that has been embedded and considered and been shackling, where it's you go primary and secondary, you go through your life, and then you move into college or university and all those other things, because ultimately you want a job, and the only way to do that is to get a formal education by doing things different. We know that the world of work has changed. We know that the world just in general has changed, but ultimately that's been controlled for such a long period of time. I think one of the sea shift changed, and one of the biggest things is parents don't see the value in different styles of learning because they know that ultimately if they go through this path that's always been there, they'll get an outcome that would hopefully protect their child to be successful and be able to provide and everything else. How has that conversation changed, or how does that go differently to I suppose in the US or anywhere else globally, I guess?
It really does apply globally, of just this concept of the changing world is making parents a little nervous, feeling a little insecure about, can I in good conscience tell my child, oh, just follow this path and everything will work out. They're realizing that might not be the case. And we're seeing, even with college graduates. Most aren't even working in the field that they studied, or they're not able to find a job in where, and now they have debt. And so there's interesting things that families are starting to realize, okay, even though I didn't want to have this conversation, I need to kind of admit to myself what I've told them to just get good grades and go to college and get a job. That line might not be as trusted as I might want it to feel. And so the conversation just changes to, okay, what do I need? I need to help my child become a passionate learner. Like, just start there. And even before, ask yourself, is my child happy? Is my child enjoying their schooling experience? Learning is an incredibly joyful experience, and we make schooling not feel that way, right? And so kids are bored, they're stressed, they're anxious. I want to have kids love learning. I think that's the greatest gift adults can give to kids, is find the joy of learning, because that's what's going to help them in their next phase of life, whether it's a new job or entrepreneurship or whatever. They need to figure out how to learn stuff quickly and enjoy that process. And so that's where it starts. Is your child enjoying their learning experience? If not, find something different. And it doesn't have to be a wholesale change day one. It just means start small. Start by introducing little steps of feeding them something they might be interested in and letting them run with that without too much structure. Those are some of the starting points. And in our book, we outline some real practical and tactical ways that parents can start embarking on that journey. And it's less intimidating than you might think. You can do it. Just start small. Listen to your child. What are they interested in? What are they not interested in? Sometimes that's as valuable. And again, that can change in an hour, like the weather in the UK. But you can have this idea that let's just nurture a child's interest until it ebbs and flows, and give them resources to really feel that joy of self-directed learning, instead of always imposing upon them the forced learning. That's where learning can shut down, if we always just are in this mode of forcing stuff on kids.
Yeah, and we had Darren Coxon on the podcast, episode 247, if anybody's interested in looking back. And the title of that episode was Creating Happy Places. And he's often known in our circles as somebody, as a bit of an AI guru, somebody who speaks at conferences, supports organizations about how to leverage AI in a safe way. But his premise was always about how do we use AI, but how do we make, beyond just AI, make schools and learning, full stop, a place that children want to be at. Because if learners want to be somewhere, like you just intimated there, or not even intimated, you've said explicitly, if learners want to be there and they enjoy being there, then learning comes almost as a byproduct of having fun and play. We've had multiple people on the podcast over the many years talking about how early years learning is it's something that we should probably learn more from, because there's a lot of play, there's a lot of continuous provision, there's a lot of student autonomy and choice in that. And then all of a sudden they go into big school with a uniform on, and somehow they have to then do what they're told in rows. And so that, I wonder, just before we maybe explore how we make the learning happen that makes people, how do we create environments where students enjoy coming? And I know that the way that you do it is slightly different in that space, because it's an additional to school. But just maybe just on a tangent there, what can we do to make schools a place that young people want to be at?
Yeah, it's a great point, a great question, because there's educators, there's teachers, there's parents that want the local schools to be a place the kids want to be. So it's a great path. A couple things I would encourage all school leaders and educators to think about is, number one, increase the amount of playtime, unstructured playtime. There's research we cite in our book that says the more structured we make learning, the less learning occurs. So it's the idea that actually the more we force structure onto learning and have everything be very rigid, we're actually doing the opposite. Less learning will occur. And we've gotten so strict and rigid in our systems that we don't allow for unstructured playtime. The other point around that is that particularly young boys, their best moment of learning is when their bodies are physically exhausted. So you think about that for a minute. We contain these boys in the seats. We let them have 12 minutes of recess and come back and learn. We should do the opposite. We should give them an hour or 2 hours of just exhaustive recess, and they'll come back and they'll learn in 10 minutes if their bodies are exhausted. It's just super interesting. So more playtime, less structure. Let students become the self-guided learners. Let them feed them with resources that align with their interests. That's where learning starts to become fun. One of the things someone shared with me yesterday, they joked that in traditional public school setting, if there's a snow day and school gets canceled, all the kids and teachers are happy, right? Whereas when kids are in a micro school or in a really engaging learning environment, a co-op or a pod or of some sort, if it gets canceled, they're sad because that's a place they want to go and learn and develop. So it's really interesting. We want to make places where kids are sad if school gets canceled instead of the other way around. And I think we could do it. I think it just, and the other big thing I would say is remove our obsession with standardized testing. That's just kind of a joke. It's just a big system that we think is measuring learning. It's not. It's measuring a kid's access to all the resources in the world. So wealthy families always perform better on tests because they have access to information and resources beyond the classroom. So just remove our obsession with standardized testing. Let me tell this one because I was just looking at it today. So in my book, I start a chapter, LeBron James is a failure. And, for those listeners, LeBron James, one of the world's, history's best NBA basketball players. But if you look at his grade sheet, percent of finals he's won, percent of field goal shots, he's like 50% at most in most of those stats. So on a grading curve, he'd be an F student. But he's one of the greatest LeBron, players of all time. And the reason I brought him up, he's part owner in Liverpool Premier League club. So it's fun that he was able to congratulate Salah and others on their victory this season. And I thought that's a fun little tie to the UK with my LeBron James is a failure chapter.
It is, and I think, Ben, you talked about it often, that whole thing, one size fits all, and one size is basically doesn't fit anybody.
Right.
And ultimately, that's the thing, because we're measuring people in exactly the same way. I remember the old example of, imagine at the age of 17, if everybody took the driving test exactly the same time, regardless of whether they're ready or not, what would that do? Well, there'd be lots of crashes, there'd be lots of failures and everything else. But we wouldn't do that because it sounds absolutely crazy. We do it with our education system.
Exactly.
I don't know, why do we do that? Like, why do we do that and then go, well, ultimately, yeah, but we knew those people were going to fail. Like, no, if you look at Standardised, we knew 40% or even higher were going to fail because that's how the metric is developed. And you go, well, why do we even allow that to happen? Because we knew they were going to fail. So what was the point in wasting their time? Like, why would we even do that? And I think it's also thinking about that whole element of, I'm just thinking about the tangent I was going on, but I just think we just consider, and I don't want to spend too much time on endpoint assessment, but we do really only prepare learners for that one thing, that snapshot in time. And ultimately, if we allowed them to accelerate quickly, so ultimately those people that do well and would get a grade, if we were going to be grading in the UK, did they have to wait that long? So just not even the point of, are those people that fail ready? But what about those people that do well? Could they have done better or even the same 2 years in advance of that? Ben, you give the example of your children where we're also, not only for those people who are not ready, we're also shackling and restricting progress and speed of progress. For those learners that would at the age of 16 do well, they probably would have done well at 14, but we've just said, you know what, you can't get better and you can't accelerate quicker because ultimately we're not ready for you to progress. It's wrong for everybody because actually, how many learners would achieve 2 or 3 years earlier?
Yeah, I'll share a story. I highlight a story in our book of a real student that I visited with. I'll call him Sam. When he was, I think, in kindergarten or first grade, early, primary school, he was tested as profoundly gifted. Whatever that means and however that is judged, but extremely accelerated. And his public school administrator told his mom, we've got nothing for Sam in the public school system. Like, he already is more than a 12th grader now. There's nothing we can give him. And so she's like, well, what do you mean? Like, there's nothing you can help him with. You can't. And so he's like, no. And so she pulled him out and looked for all kinds of resources. And he joined our open ed program because we're like, whatever the kid needs, let's give that child. If they're 15 and need kindergarten math, give it to them. If they're kindergarten and they need college math, give it to them. Whereas schools aren't set up to give that range of flexibility. And you're right, Steve, many kids can go so much faster and beyond. We're just holding them back by saying you've got to stay in these birth year cohorts or else the system breaks down because it's built around efficiency and processing, not learning.
So I'm getting excited here now because this feels like that whole mentality that we said. I think I've said it a few times. Which is that when the student's ready, the teacher appears or the master appears. That whole concept. It's not mine. It's from taken from ancient wisdom, but that whole idea of age and stage and ability and what's needed and relevance and interest, like. I'm just naive. I just don't understand why this isn't the case, and hasn't been the case. But it isn't for lots of reasons: compliance, scalability, cost, keeping the masses subject. I get all that. What does that? How does that look different then? So, for your setting, that must look very, very different because we have, and the same in the US, you'll have grade 7 and you'll have year 6 and they're taught year 6 maths. And in the same way as that young person you were talking about there that has done all that, they passed all that. Like my daughter, she's not quite that advanced, but my daughter, I remember her being in year 4 in the UK, so she was 8, and they said she got greater depth in maths already, so she's done all the maths. I said, so is she doing year 5 maths? And they went, oh no, that's not how it works. I said, what do you mean that's not how it works? They said, well, no, they just do more to ensure that they embed the year 4 maths, because if they do year 5 maths now, then what will they learn in year 5? And I was like, well, I remember being at primary school and they used to have coloured books. So when you'd move from the coloured textbook and the aim was to get to the black textbook. And I know there was only me and Cara Bell that ever got to that black textbook. And I got there and it wasn't based on what it. So I just don't get how we do that. So what does it look like differently from a practical perspective? How does that work in your setting?
Yeah, just like you described. What does the child need? What do they want to learn? And let's go find the resource that helps them achieve that goal. Period. Whatever you want to learn, whatever you want. And that's so when you take off the concept of birth year cohorts and stay at this exact pace and you can't go farther, you just you're destroying the creativity of children. To Sir Ken Robinson again, like we're just and what he said was, we take out of children their natural curiosity that they're born with. And that's the opposite of what educators want to do. So let's feed their curiosity, give them resources, help them navigate where they want to go. And once you unleash that power, kids thrive. They start to gain ownership of their own education plan. One of the chapters in our book is called Give Your Child a Voice. We so often think adults need to do everything for children. No, if you can arm them with a voice and it doesn't have to be 100% shareholder voice. Like keep some adult balance in there, right? So, but at least give them 50-50, maybe 51% votes of what their education looks like, and give them a chance to chime in on that. What do you like? What do you want to do? Today, and not what their choice today doesn't need to be what they choose 20 years from now. Let them just have some autonomy in their education design today. And that choice and that accountability to themselves is the gift we're giving them for future decisions. It's super powerful. And again, we've been doing it for, our oldest is 32. So we have 32 plus years of experience as a parent. We've been running our program for 16 years with collective enrollments over 100,000 students. And so we've seen it. It's not just some fringe idea that might work, or who knows if this could really happen, or is this theoretical? This is real. Like real families are doing this and succeeding and finding joy in the journey with their children instead of battling every year, every step, every teacher, every test, every grade. It's happening, and family is coming from the ground up, and it's just exploding these days with parents more and more wanting to adapt education to their children instead of the other way around.
Yeah, I think we talk about that agency across all levels, but with guardrails. So ultimately, where you're allowing the freedom, but ultimately there are a few rules, clear boundaries, I think would be probably the best way to describe it, in terms of that. Yes, you can do this and this, but you're picking 10 things that are prescribed rather than you can pick anything, I guess.
Yeah, we like to, I don't know if you notice our logo is open ed, but the O is not closed. The O is brackets. That represents this concept of you have some brackets around there, but a whole lot of flexibility in between. I love that, Steve. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, it's the guardrails thing. So, like, when do you determine where guardrails sit? Because I think that's this, and I know this is how long is a piece of string type question, and I know that there's no one size fits all. But is there almost like a methodology that parents can think through? Because I've got an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. My 14-year-old, and they're not the same, as you said earlier. These children aren't the same. One of them. They're both incredibly bright in different ways. One of them's an introvert, one of them's an extrovert. I also know that both of them, if left to their own devices, will do certain things. So you give them some level of direction and whatever. And some of them need an arm. Both of them at different times need an arm round, and some of them need a rocket. Come on, you need to crack on with this. So how any tips there from I know a lot of our listeners will be educators, but those educators will also be parents as well. How does that work?
So first answer is, as you said, it depends on the child. So you have to listen to your child, follow your instincts as a parent, as an educator. So do your best to tailor your approach to each child. Now, with that said, some of the guardrails that we suggest really dates back to centuries of the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, right? So we kind of say every adult needs to have some basic math, reading, writing capability. And even the reading and writing changes now with so much with AI. But let's just start with those basics. Make sure you have some plan to have your child gain access to a little bit of math, a little bit of reading, a little bit of writing every day. Even research goes 20 minutes each of those is significant. You can make significant strides just 20 minutes a day in those areas if you can connect the plan with the child's interest. So there's lots of math curriculum. Find one that works for a child. Trial and error. I like to say, when kids say, "I'm not good at math," I just say, "Oh, sorry, that's the adult's fault. We haven't found the curriculum that clicks with your math learning brain. It's not you, it's the curriculum." And when you say that to a kid, they say, "Oh, I always thought it was me." No, it's let's find a curriculum that matches. And I guarantee we can find some curriculum somewhere out there that clicks with a child's learning style for math. Then when it comes to reading and writing, the world is open. It's like, what do you want to read? What do you want to learn about? You want to learn about Premier League soccer? You want to learn about dinosaurs? You want to learn about Mars, whales, pirates? Like, find something that they're interested in, and reading can become something. If it's a barrier for them, they'll plow through to be able to get access to content that they're interested in. Writing, same thing. If they say, "Oh, I'm not a good writer," well, it just means you haven't found the things you want to write about. And start with just, transcribing a fun story that you like, or listen to audiobooks and write things about that, or write summaries of what you're doing, or, just practice writing. Once you get kind of those three things, then I say, go start a business, because now your business entrepreneurship experience is going to pull in all those things in the community that around communication skills, around presentation, around sales, marketing, website development, texting. You're going to have to communicate well. All those things, teamwork, and finding what you're good at and what you're not good at and have to partner with. So start with the 3 R's, invite kids to solve problems in their community, and that's as much guardrails as I think is needed.
So to flip that, rather than just the educators and think about homeschooling, if we were to keep, and homeschooling doesn't take off and your business fails, I'm not saying it is going to, just bear with me, but ultimately if state education and everybody going into school changed, what should leaders do in those spaces? Because everybody's the case of, there isn't any time, there isn't any of this, everything's a reason why change can't happen, but ultimately change will be forced because more people are deciding homeschooling and these online platforms and everything else is the way. And I suppose I don't want you to give the argument for the opposition, and I'm not saying it's a competition, but ultimately, how can those leaders step into that change when ultimately the whole thing is, you speak to anybody, we haven't got enough money, we haven't got enough time. Well, that's probably the whole world. It's life as an adult generally, but ultimately, what should they do to really save the day for those schools that potentially might become obsolete in 20, 30 years because everybody will make a decision to go elsewhere?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up. When my wife and I started our business, we said to each other, you know what? We honestly would love one day to go out of business, because every school turned into a community learning center and there was no demand for other personalized education. Like, we want the system to adopt these principles. We absolutely are begging schools around the world, do this. Create an open education environment in your school by making it feel like a community learning center. Invite mentors, resources, parents, families, students, online, book-based, community problems. Solve problems in your community together. That is our dream state. And we hope that then makes us be irrelevant one day, Steve. We really do, because we want the world to embrace this idea that local communities can come together, solve problems that the world makes, feel like they're overwhelming and unsolvable. Well, forget all the stress of the world. Go meet together in your communities, make your cities, your towns, your neighborhoods safe, happy, productive, collaborative, enjoyable. That's my probably naive goal of the world, is let's have happy, healthy communities again. We're like all angry at everybody. And it's like, just can't we solve that? And I think that can start with school leaders just saying, you know what, this obsession with testing, this obsession with structured grade levels, this obsession with this singular path to success, which doesn't exist anymore, I'm going to give that up. I'm just going to say, what can we create in our local school building that makes people want to come here because they're enjoying learning and they're solving real difficult problems? Kids, we sometimes think kids want everything easy. They don't. They actually want to work on hard things that can solve problems that they can see. We have people that want to help, people in wheelchairs be able to access doors. So they create little automatic door openers for their wheelchairs, using 3D printers and Arduino and coding, and it automatically opens doors for them. They don't even have to push buttons because a wheelchair triggers the door to open. Like they want life jackets that save lives. Like they're kids that want to solve real human problems, and we just say, go sit in a room and prepare for a test. And they're like, boring. I don't want to do that. I want to do something meaningful. And leaders have that chance to redesign your school, push back against legislation that says you can't. Because guess what? Somewhere in that legislation, it probably says you can. So just go do it.
Yeah, and I love that permission and that giving of that permission. And I think some of that is tied to something that I read in one of your blog posts. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. But I absolutely loved the article when the smartest person in the world called out of schools, and it tells a story about Marilyn Vosavant, who literally is one of the great. Maybe tells that, but then I've got there's a point that comes up in one of the suggestions that I really wanted to link into. Yeah, maybe tell us that story, and then I'll pick up the point that I wanted to.
Sure. So Marilyn, early on in her life, was judged as assessed as profoundly gifted, and had some, world record of the greatest IQ ever. And even then she says, number one, those tests are meaningless. And so eventually Guinness World Record dropped that, record because they realized test scores don't actually, you can't say this is the smartest person in the world because no test can do that. Every child, she says, every child is different. So I performed well on that particular exam. Other children have strengths in other areas. So she kind of debunked the very test that gave her the fame. So that I love that about her. Number two, her, many of her interviews, she says, when you impose education on kids, you take away their natural curiosity of learning. So we are destroying she was ahead of Sir Ken Robinson. She was saying early on, you cannot impose education on children because that takes away the very gift of learning that you want them to develop. And so she's like, you need to open it up. You need to have access to resources and interests and passions. And here's, what was once called the world's smartest woman saying we need to do stuff differently back in the 70s, I think. So super interesting story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what it highlights as a story is that the paper, the numbers, the recognition, the grades mean nothing if it doesn't translate into something that actually makes something more than just the number, the grade. Like that is in itself just an objective concept. It's not necessarily useful unless it's relevant. I regularly talk about my dad got some kind of molecular biology qualification. And he was working in a factory for years and years and years. He did become a teacher in the end and ended up becoming a primary school teacher. And then because he had a biology degree, he became the science coordinator when he started teaching, obviously. But I remember him going to study chimpanzees in zoos for 6 weeks. Like that was one of the things that he did when we were younger. He did university late, and that was his qualification. And you're thinking, what on earth is that about? But he was interested in it, and eventually it led to something. But the point in that blog post, as beyond that really resonated for me was where there's a piece that talks about what we're still missing. So you were talking about, and there's a few things there about how we force children to sit passively, which I know that's a big thing that you fight against in terms of making sure that students should be able to move. And we've talked about that a lot on the podcast, memorization and whatever else over independent thinking. But this thing jumped out to me because of some things that I'm interested in around critical thinking. I used to be a religious studies philosophy teacher. So you mentioned that we rarely teach critical examination of multiple perspectives. And I am a huge proponent of us developing this ability to critical think and look at things from a variety of perspectives. And we kind of know why that is the case, because there's not enough time. We've got to cover all this stuff in our curriculum.
Right.
Just as a kind of as a thought, how do we do that? How can we create a space that teaches critical examination?
I'd start with community problems. Identify, are there challenges in the community? You know, is there trash in the city park? Are there lights? You know, it's too dark on this trail, or just local community problems. Start there and have kids start imagining what they would solve. One of the stories I like to share is I took a field trip to eBay headquarters. Uh, and you know, we all know eBay. They have been around forever and sell all kinds of stuff. I took 100 kids to a field trip with eBay executives, and I invited the executives. Let's do a little activity. Let's have you share some real business problems that eBay is facing, and let's give these average 10-year-olds in the room, average age, let's give them 10 minutes to pitch solutions to your eBay executive problems. And they're like, okay, yeah, fun, we'll do it. So they shared some of their business, their quarterly business challenges. Every business has that list of what are we trying to tackle this quarter. These 10-year-olds came up with brilliant ideas and solutions to these problems. And the executives admitted some of those ideas are better than what our adult people have ever shared in our business meetings. Like, it was, mind blowing to them that 10-year-olds, because they thought differently about the problem. Adults get locked into solutions that they can see, oh, this could solve it. 10-year-olds just came up with random ideas, and it triggered solutions that these executives had never even thought of. So starting with just real world problems, what do you want to solve for? That creates that critical thinking. I like to then add on some sort of entrepreneurship or even nonprofit management, just so you start thinking about, where can we fund this? Can it be sustainable? Can it be replicatable? Can it be scalable? If you start to think of some of those factors next, it makes those community problems you solved even greater impact in the world.
It's a really interesting thing, because ultimately, if you look at problems and don't write them, then think of the solution, and the whole process is to then, over a period of time, to think collectively around solutions, and kind of like an action learning set of each solving each other's problems collectively, and there's pros and cons to that. But ultimately, actually, education is underfunded, is what you hear. But actually, if it's underfunded and it was a business, the entrepreneurial spirit would be, how can we increase new product and new opportunities for growth if this thing is no longer viable financially? And ultimately, by allowing the learners to step and develop those skills, I think collectively, educators and educational leaders need to think with that as well, because ultimately you can't just think, we get paid per learner this, and that's the only money we've got to spend. Yeah, I know that there's some schools and organisations that will rent out buildings and all those kind of things. Great, but there's so much more opportunity in terms of financial income that schools and educational establishments could make, that potentially would go into even partnerships. We have a problem that the learners want to solve. How, through setting up an NPO, a charitable organisation, this would only fund solutions that would impact the community, taking corporate social responsibility that is on every business's agenda globally, and they have to take the CSR and say, we will give this to solve some of these problems, because ultimately that makes the business look good. Reputationally, that's an impact. Stepping into that space to help fund this type of learning, and then a solution to communities, to states, to nations, is such a strong message. And there's so much funding in CSR that you would be able to probably look at collectively solving things that financially governments can't, because they don't have the money to invest greater. Taking that and thinking differently in terms of how you create and generate a new income stream for an education organisation.
No, I think that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant, Steve. Anyone listening, do what Steve just said. Right? I mean, that's a great path. And I'll add on top of that, it's underfunding if we think this system is what should be funded. If we think the system should be grade level specific, capped on learning, prepare them for exams, yeah, maybe that is underfunded. I'd argue that it's not, but let's say that's underfunded. Then change the plan. Like, what funding do you have? And let's make that possible for kids to learn what they want to learn, solve problems in their community, grow and develop, and add value to the world. That would be a great purpose that I don't think it's underfunded. Like, it doesn't take that much funding to do a student-led type experience. That's what's so exciting about what we've been working on, is we've been trying to show that it doesn't cost as much as you think to make a really well orchestrated education plan that's self-directed and learner driven. The costs are not as high as you might think. And we have lots of data and points that we share. Won't get into that, but I agree with you. If you think it's underfunded, change the model so that your funding aligns with what your goal is, which is developing healthy, happy learners.
Absolutely. So if you've been watching the podcast before you came on, you might have seen that we do 3 quick fire questions at the end of every episode. What you won't have seen is we changed them because our new episodes with them in haven't gone out just yet. So we're going to throw these at you. They are quick fire. I will start, Ben will come in second, and I'll finish if that's all right. And if it's not all right, I'm going to do it anyway, Matt, I'll be honest. So, I was always just being polite. So the first question is, if schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoyed this experience, what would change overnight?
They would adapt to serve customers instead of expect them to take whatever they get.
Love it. What's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
That there's a magical standard that every child should be at every grade level. That's false. Every child is different. Don't expect every single child to breathe, speak, crawl, walk, jump at the exact same pace at age 9 and 4 months. Drop it. Don't hold that standard anymore.
Last one. If a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you say?
You don't. Don't let schooling get in the way of your education. That's a Mark Twain quote from back in the day. Don't go. If you don't, like, go if you want to. If there's a reason you want to go. If not, go start a business even at 10 and go learn what you want to learn. That will be your greatest experience ever.
Love that. I absolutely love it. I'm not going to let my kids listen to this podcast, but no, but we're with you. I think
don't send them back. Don't send them back.
No, I love it, and I love that you the work that you're doing. You've been going in this direction for a while. You've written the book, which we'll link to in the show notes as well. And people, if you haven't seen the work that Matt and the team are doing around Open Ed, please check it out. When we got opportunity to interview Matt, we knew that it was going to be a good one, and it absolutely has been. We know that these kind of conversations are happening in pockets all around the world, so being able to amplify those and make sure that we're connecting the dots globally is a real privilege. So Matt, thank you so much for joining us on the Edufuturists podcast, and keep up doing wonderful work to free us from the shackles, and we can open up education.
Likewise, Ben and Steve, keep up the great work. Keep the message going.
Thank you.
Cheers, man.
Shaping the